morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to all of our attendees tuning in from around the world. Today's broadcast of Invisible Women in Sport is an Institute for Sport and Social Justice production. I am your producer, Garnett Overby III. All guests will be muted during this production, but I encourage you to use the chat feature to ask a question or leave a comment. We will reserve time at the end to answer your questions. So now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our host, Taylor Middleton.
Hi, everyone. It's glad to see everyone back. Welcome to season 2, episode 11 of Invisible Women in Sport. I am your host, Taylor Middleton, as Garnett said, and today I have the lovely pleasure of being able to speak with Dr. Andrea Woodson-Smith, a professor at North Carolina Central University, who also specializes, sorry, everyone, who also specializes in adaptive physical activity in sports and physical education and pedagogy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and thank you for having me.
Of course. So like I said before, we are going to start off with a little bit of rapid fire to get everyone immersed into the show today. And so it'll be about 30 seconds. It's just a few this or that questions and like one kind of open-ended question, but it goes by super fast. So
All
I'm
right.
going to set my timer for 30 seconds. And ready?
Yes.
3, 2, 1. Basketball or volleyball?
Basketball.
McDonald's or Wendy's?
Wendy's.
Ice cream or cake?
Ooh. Ice cream.
Go out or stay in?
Stay in.
And then what's a goal you want to achieve by the end of the year?
By the end of this year, my goal would be to impact at least 3 females to participate in wheelchair basketball.
Nice. You just made it time. We're ready to start. So like I said before, just from reading your bio and speaking with you, I believed it was very clear that basketball was your first choice. However, I was informed that you also had another sport that you really enjoyed playing. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you ended up actually choosing basketball?
Sure. So I originally started off with basketball as a young girl. I think I was in 3rd grade when I started basketball. I actually didn't start volleyball until, which was my second sport, until I was in middle school. I had a role model who was the daughter of my babysitter, and she was in the same, I think she was the same year as my brother in high school, and she played volleyball. And so I did pretty much everything that she did, or at least tried to. And I fell in love with volleyball. I was invited to join the Junior Olympic volleyball team, and my coach there was Coach Davidson, who was coaching at James Madison at the time, and she was very tough. I mean, she was extremely tough, but I loved the way that she created this team from a variety of other teams in the area, and we all became very good friends, and I think that experience alone created a love for that sport for me. And so I wanted to eventually go to college and play volleyball. But I felt as though at that particular time, the uniform was inappropriate for females. When I was playing Junior Olympic volleyball, we wore biker shorts, not biker shorts, but running shorts. Mm-hmm. And so they were already short at the, anyway, but then they went to briefs. And I didn't like the fact that we were wearing briefs out in public while playing a sport. And so I decided at that time that that was not going to be the sport for me. And so basketball was my other sport, and I was probably equally good at both. And so I decided to choose basketball and go that route, following my brother's footsteps to be able to play that sport in college.
So when you were in high school, what was kind of that defining moment where you knew like you were really going to be good and you were probably going to be one of the best in your state at basketball?
Honestly, I really didn't know. I was very humble in high school. I just enjoyed playing. I enjoyed playing with my teammates. It wasn't until one of my teammates literally ran up to me in the hallway, jumped on my back and said, "You're going to be an Olympic basketball player." And I said, okay. Okay, all right. And from that point on, I never really, it really never dawned on me to really start training for the Olympics. Like I said, there was no one in my area who went that far before me, or even maybe even had that goal. I'm not sure. But I myself didn't know how to get to the point of elite basketball player. How do I train my body to get in shape for that? I had no idea how to do any of that. And I didn't have mentors around who, had the idea themselves to be able to go to that particular level. And so it was pretty much getting thrown into the different venues of Junior Olympic volleyball. And then I tried out for I think it was the Junior Olympic basketball team. And that was the eye opener right there. That was me going into that tryout. And literally, it felt as if I had cement blocks on the bottom of my feet when I was walking down the stadium. When they called my number to come play, I said, oh no, I can't even get down the stadium stairs. There's no way I'm going to be able to run. And so at that point, that's when I started to, started running a little bit. I took up track just to get in shape. I was not a track runner, and I did the hardest event that I could find, which was the 300 hurdles.
Jeez.
300 intermediate hurdles. And at that time, I didn't know I had arthritis in my hips. And, people would come up to me and said, you're just jumping over the hurdles. I said, well, I'm striding over the hurdles. At least I thought it was, but they were saying, no, you're literally jumping over the hurdle. I said, okay, well, this is not my sport. I'm just training to get in shape for basketball at the collegiate level. And so that's pretty much where it went, just being thrown into it and kind of figuring out on my own as I went along.
It's so funny that you say that, because when I was in high school, I would play basketball to like prep. So I just wasn't doing anything before track season would start. But like not knowing where you're going, like I had to do AAU and like USATF just to be able to have that opportunity to possibly compete Division I. Because like my high school was education focused completely. No track there. So everybody was like, then how did you run? I'm like, well, I jumped, first of all. But yes, definitely understand that. So being able to overcome all of those things, how was that transition then into college for you playing basketball at that level?
So at that level, the physical component it wasn't easy, but it was something that I was already used to. So I already, I did running, I did weights, I did 3 sports in one season: basketball, volleyball, track and field at high levels. And so I was already used to performing physically at somewhat of that level. The academic part was the hardest part of all of it, being able to truly understand the difference from high school academics to collegiate academics. And it was an eye opener. I struggled my freshman year, going in, they always say the freshman year is the hardest one because you're independent at that point. I wasn't as independent as students, non-student athletes, of course, but I was still somewhat independent and had to do things on my own, be able to study on my own and things like that. And, the scenario that I gave you was, psychology was my thing. I loved psychology and it wasn't my major, but I loved learning about the psychology of the mind and things like that. And so I went into my first test as a freshman, my very first test. And I thought for sure I made an A on that exam. And I was so excited to get my paper back. And the exam grade was like a 32. And I said, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to make it in, academically at this school, but, the support system, the academic support system. My dad was a guidance counselor with the high school, my high school. And so he knew the athletic academic advisor very well, Casey Carter, and he would contact her. She told me after I graduated, of course, that he would call almost once a week just to see how I was doing and, tell her that I was struggling in certain areas, because one of the things that was very difficult for me was to express my concerns, express how I was feeling, you know, with my academics. I didn't really trust anyone. And I definitely didn't talk to anybody about what I was going through, except for maybe my very closest friends who were non-athletes, except for one. Those were the people that I shared everything with.
Gotcha. So then can you tell us a little bit about the significance of this picture that Garnett is sharing with us right now?
You know, I'm really not sure. So this is me playing at James Madison. This is my freshman year. And I really went in not expecting to play a lot my freshman year. And I was going to use that year as a learning year. One of the reasons why I chose James Madison is because I wanted to be a part of a program to make a difference and to really help the program become established, even more so than what it already was. I didn't want to go to an already established program that was, you know, ranked top 5 in the US. I really didn't want to go that route, except for Carolina. Carolina was my other choice. And so this was, like I said, I came in as a freshman. I said I was going to learn. Plus, we had 7 seniors on the team who were very good. We actually went in that season. I think we were undefeated or maybe lost 1, and we got into the NCAA. Made it all the way through the Sweet 16. And I was telling my sons the other day, I said, you know, with that Elite 8 game, they ran it perfectly. The team that was on the court ran it perfectly, exactly how the coach wanted it run. That you guard everyone except for the one player who has not made a shot or taken a shot the whole tournament. And she took the shot at the last second and made it. And that was it. It was a heartbreaker. I mean, it was an absolute heartbreaker, but you know, we were one of the first teams, if not the only team, to make it that far in the NCAA. So that picture right there was kind of my transitioning from really learning to actually getting on the court and playing. And this is one of my best skills was rebounding. And so that's what I wanted to be known for is one of the big time rebounders for JMU. I was a pretty good, decent rebounder in high school and still pretty good, decent rebounder in wheelchair basketball as well.
Good, good. Now, despite everything that was going on with academics, you were also finding out about a disability of yours, as well as injuries that you had in the past that you didn't know about. So how was it managing basketball, finding out that you had had 2 hip fractures in high school and then 1 during your freshman season, and also with your arthritis?
It was challenging. You know, my first 2 were undiagnosed. The only reason why I believe that they were hip fractures is because of the way the pain was, the location of the pain, and the way that I had to walk afterwards was all the same as the one that was diagnosed. And so what happened is that I was in a game and I went up for a rebound, and this happened all 3 times. I went up for a rebound, someone undercut me, and I landed on my hip and it fractured. And so I didn't know that it was fractured. And so I continued to play for 7 minutes after the fact until I just couldn't do it any longer. And so it was during Christmas time, and we went to a clinic, got an appointment, and that's when they determined that it was a hip fracture and I had arthritis, severe arthritis. And the doctor told me that my hips were as old as a 70-year-old woman. And if I was your daughter, if I was his daughter, I would not allow you to play basketball any longer. And in my mind, you know, coming out of Virginia as the #1 player in Virginia for, you know, 1990, I said, fix it, fix it. I'm not your daughter, and I'm going to continue to play. And that's what I did. I continued to play. We made modifications and accommodations for me to get through that next year. And then I think that's when I had my second hip fracture. Actually, I had the second hip fracture in college. That was the one that was actually diagnosed. And then after that, I was out for my sophomore year. And my sophomore year was supposed to be my coming out year. And I won't ever forget it. I grabbed a rebound off the baseline, an offensive rebound, and I shot it back. Somebody was calling for the ball, and I shot it back in the basket, made it, and I said, yes, I'm ready to go. Let's go. It's time. And I think maybe within that month or so, the hip fracture happened and I was out. And that's when all the problems came about, because once I was out for good. So I wasn't practicing or anything. I gained weight. The mental aspect was playing on me to where I didn't know if I wanted to be there anymore. I didn't want to be at that college anymore. I wanted to transfer out of that college. I was just mad at the world, because that sport was taken away from me at that time, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was going to be able to come back. Kind of like the COVID situation. You don't know if you're going to be able to come back and play or finish out your year. But I was able to come back my junior year and play, and the pain was just so excruciating that I just couldn't do it any longer. I said, I can't continue to put my body through this. It's causing me so much energy to, walk around campus, and our campus was hilly. And so for me to go up, hills and go up flights of stairs, I was expending a lot of energy. And then to go to practice and expend more energy. Some days were fabulous. I remember one time in practice, I was the fastest one in practice that day. It only happened once, but it was a great feeling of almost like I was free. The arthritis was gone for that one day, and I was able to be that top athlete that I was going into college. And so I enjoyed that day, but it was only for a day. Reality sunk back in the next day, and it was really hard to get to your senior year. And I think one of the hardest parts was senior photos. And so at senior photos, there were only two of us who came in the same class. And she was dressed in her uniform, and I was dressed in coaching apparel. And that was hard. That was probably the hardest day of being a senior, is taking your senior photo, not as a senior athlete. And so, from there, it just went downhill. I was very fortunate to graduate. I was very fortunate to stay on this earth, because it was tough. It was very tough trying to get through that mental aspect of transitioning from top level athlete to now you're not an athlete at all. So that was very tough and challenging.
And dealing with all of those challenges and finding out all this stuff about yourself and your health, it takes a toll. But even after all of that, you were invited to the ABL and the WNBA. And I know that challenges didn't stop there. So can you just talk a little bit about that and how that experience was for you?
Yes. So once I graduated college, I just decided, I'm just going to start working out on my own. I found a gym and I found some good friends, and we probably played pickup at every gym and every park that there is in the area where I am. And it was just fun. It was freeing. And I still had pain, but I could tolerate it. And I was taking medications to, lessen the pain some, but it was still there. And I was able to, I think, put myself into almost like another psyche. And so at that point, I went from being angry. You go through those stages of grief. So I went from being angry and mad to, sad, then to denial. And so at that particular time, I was in heavy denial. I said, yes, I know it exists, but it's not going to hold me back. And then when the ABL came, I received a letter to try out for that, and I decided not to. And then when the WNBA came, I said, I'm going to try out for that one. All I have to do is make the team, and then they will cover the cost to be able to take care of this arthritis. And then I'll be good and be able to play from there. And so that was heavy denial because there was no way that they were going to cover a cost of something that was pre-existing, number one. And I wasn't good enough to make the team anyway. But in my mind, all I had to do was continue to train the way I was training and go for the tryout and do the best that I could and pray that I would make it. And so that's what I did. I tried out. Unfortunately, I did not make it. And then after that, it was just, okay, well, I'll just wait. I'll wait and I'll something else will come about. And so something else came about, and that was the opportunity to work on my PhD in Texas at Texas Women's University. And we went to Dallas, Texas to interview the wheelchair basketball team there for my disability sport class that I was taking. And one of the girls on that team, Pam Fontaine, was a USA basketball player. And so we interviewed her, and they recruited me to play wheelchair basketball. But in the back of my mind, I'm in Dallas, I'm still waiting because there was talk that the WNBA team was going to come to Dallas. So I'll just bide my time and wait. And when it comes, I'll try out again. That was my mentality. I think fortunate for me, it didn't happen until recently that they acquired a team, but it allowed me to transition into wheelchair basketball and then further my playing into USA national team.
So it's just like after going through kind of being told no a few times and then to still be given an opportunity to play on a different level, that must have been like a very good feeling. So can you just talk about becoming a member of the USA Paralympic women's wheelchair basketball team?
Yes. So, my goal overall was to play on the Olympic team. Once I was in college, I did want to go to the Olympics, and I just had to figure out how I was going to do that because the Olympics was in 96 and I was going to graduate in 94. So that meant I had to go somewhere to train to be able to make that team. And international was not on my venue because I was not going to travel overseas. That was hands down. I was not going to fly across the country to another country to be able to do that. And so I kind of gave up on that dream. But once I got into wheelchair basketball and went to a wheelchair basketball camp, kind of a summer camp, just like any other sport, the coaches there stated that I would eventually make a USA national team. And I didn't quite believe it because I was brand new. At the camp, I wasn't paid, they didn't pay me any attention because I was brand new. And I didn't know how to use a wheelchair, and they were more focused on the USA national team members at that particular time. And so I didn't believe it, but I knew that there was that opportunity to make a national team in a different sport, basically the same sport, just with equipment now, different equipment. And so after playing, eventually the competitiveness came back into me, the drive came back into me. And so I decided that, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and train. I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying my community of friends that I've made through this sport. And so why not? Let's go ahead and do it. Let's give it a shot. I think I can try out. And so I did. I tried out for the first one, which was in 2003. I did not make it, but I was an alternate for the team. And eventually I was placed onto that team. And at the Paralympic level, the training is a lot different than college basketball. And so you train harder, you train more. I trained 3 times a day, shooting, lifting weights, pushing in my wheelchair, 3 times a day as much as I could, just to get in shape for the tryout. And then once you make the team, then we did have a strength and conditioning coach in 2004. And so they gave us a regimen of what we were supposed to do for, to strengthen ourselves and to make ourselves faster and quicker. So I did that, but it was a beautiful thing. I mean, I made it to where I wanted to be. I was on the 2014, but unfortunately I was not able to participate at the Paralympics in 2004.
Well, despite all of that, though, with the ending not being able to participate, you did get the chance to also hold a lot of leadership positions. within the associations for the NWBA, including vice chair of the women's chair of the youth development committee of the women's division, and more. So how important is it for you to be leading these committees and spreading awareness for your community?
So one thing that when I was on, and I'm going to go back a little bit because I was on the 2010 stretch. So 2010, 2011, I should say 2010 World Games, 2010, 11 Pan American Games, and 2012 the Paralympic team. And so at each one of those, when we were at different countries, we would go to different schools and do exhibitions and run skills and activities for kids with disabilities. And, that really set into me that, you have to give back. Once you make it that far, you have to give back. And so that was my priority, was when I come back to the US, how can I give back to the US? And so that was very challenging for me, because in the area where I am, and I was still playing, so it was very hard for me to balance still playing, still training, working, family, secondary family, and still be able to help others. I was able to assist a juniors team, wheelchair basketball team in my area. And so I was one of the assistant coaches there for a little bit. And so I was able to make an impact with them by helping out with that team and showing them, correct technique on, wheelchair basketball skills, talk to them about academics, anything like that, to be able to make that impact. But unfortunately for me, I really didn't want to coach. I'd rather, do something separate or smaller, more individually based, or helping others to be able to coach and training others on how to learn how to coach and become, administrators and things like that. And so once I started to transition out of playing wheelchair basketball, which I'm still in, but I'm still trying to transition out of that. It's important now that as an African-American female, I put myself in positions of leadership positions, administrative positions. So that way people can see, youth can see, females can see that you can, yes, play, you can contribute recreationally, or you can compete at a high level. You can go to college and play. You can make the USA team. And then once you finish, go back and create a program if you're able to, or go into a leadership position to give back and to make sure that we're still continuing to have women and people of color in those positions. And so that's one of the reasons why I took the nomination for being a board member with the National Wheelchair Basketball Association, is so that people can visually see that we do have females, because we have a very heavy staff of females on the board of directors now. And I am a woman of color. And so I want the youth to be able to see that and experience that. So now I'm trying to venture myself and get myself out there to different programs. Like I said, I'm still playing because I want girls to see that I'm still there and that I can be a role model for them and help them and mentor them along that path. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm still playing, as well as being in that administrative position.
Well, that's honestly just great of you. And even talking about that, not just being in a leadership role, but trying to create this program at the school you're teaching at. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you feel it's so important to start having more adaptive sports focused programs in education?
Sure. So one of the things that, sorry, I just got distracted. One of my former students just said hello. So, if you look at wheelchair basketball and you look at the national team and you look at the youth and you look at adult leagues, there aren't a lot of minorities in the sport. In different areas, you may see more in the urban cities, you may see more And so there's certain programs and there's certain people who do a very good job of being intentional about recruiting, youth of color. And so, one is Keith Wallace in the Illinois area, Dan Ferreira in the Chicago area as well. And then Doug Garner, who's at UTA, University of Texas Arlington, in that area as well. And so they recruit a lot of minorities into their programs. One's intercollegiate and the other one is recreation based. And so what I want to do is to be able to increase those numbers within the women's division, youth division, and especially in the collegiate division. And priority is within the USA national team, because we need to create that pipeline and start developing and recruiting girls of color to get involved in the sport. And so one of the ways of doing that is, one, you have to be intentional about doing so. And you have to know, how do you do this? Where do you look to do this? Where can you find those people, and who can be the best person to be able to reach those people to encourage them to participate in the sport? And then on the other end of that, once you get them in, how do you keep them? Because a lot of our athletes, female athletes, fall off when they graduate high school. If they don't go to college and aren't recruited in college to play, they don't continue to play through a women's team for the women's division. And so what I want to be able to do, and what my committee is trying to do, is, one, recruit them, get them involved in the sport, get mentors, who will be able to help transition them from junior ball to hopefully collegiate ball, and if not, to women's division, and then also to the national team. And so we're looking at different ways on how to do that. Once we have that, then at my university, I'm hoping that I can bring an intercollegiate program there. So that way we have all these kids out here in the United States who have disabilities and aren't getting an education, higher education. They graduate high school, some of them don't graduate high school. And so that allows them to be able to set a goal for themselves to say, I can get to college and I can play a sport in college, just like everyone else who has that opportunity. And I want them to be able to do that, and really be able to, have pride in that opportunity, have that goal, have that opportunity to have that goal. Number one, to be able to participate in an intercollegiate program for wheelchair basketball, for the sport that you play, and then go off and get that degree and and earn a career. And so that's the whole, the whole shell of it, is that I want those athletes and those individuals, those youth and adults, to have that opportunity just like everyone else.
So even speaking to that, just creating those opportunities, can you kind of talk about some of the struggles that it is for someone trying to participate in adaptive sports, like the kind of just the disadvantages or the resources that they may not have, and why it's a little bit harder for people who are in the disabled community to participate in sport, whether it's basketball or other ones?
All right, so one of the biggest barriers is cost and equipment. To play a sport, an adaptive sport, you have to have equipment, or the program has to have equipment in order for individuals to come try the sport out and then continue within the sport. Let's say, for instance, with track and field, you may have to have a certain prosthetic, a running leg, and some insurances do not cover the cost of that piece of equipment to use for track. Insurance companies may not cover the cost for an additional wheelchair for sport and activity. And so, that's one of the biggest barriers, is cost and equipment. The other one is when you look around the United States and you look at the number of programs that are in the United States, a lot of times those programs are further away from the individuals who are actually participating in the program. Typically, you may have a minimum transportation, a minimum distance of 2 hours to get to a program. I know for myself, I traveled 2.5 hours to participate on a D2 men's wheelchair basketball team. And luckily I was able to do that then because I didn't have children. But now that I have children, I can't do that. And so, you know, some people will travel 2 hours, some people travel 3 hours, and that's just one distance. And when you're talking youth and adults even, you know, you go to school from 7:30 until 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. You get out of school, then you have to travel 2 to 2.5 hours, 3 hours to your practice. Then you practice 2 hours, and then you have the 3-hour drive back home. It's 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock by the time you get home. Then you have to wake up at 5:30 to go to school. It's exhausting. You know, it's extremely exhausting. And then when you factor in the actual disability, depending on the type of disability that individual has, there may be additional factors that you have to consider, you know, during the distance to get to and from your practices. You may have to worry about your body breaking down and not being able to make a practice or a tournament. You have the cost of the tournament itself. You have the cost of the program. And then, you know, when you get into an intercollegiate program, that program has to be able to come up with different ways of creating scholarships. You know, for able-bodied, you can get an athletic scholarship and you're covered 4 years as long as you are able to sign that contract every year. But for adapted sports, there's different types of scholarships that you have to look for. If you're a veteran, you might be able to get veteran assistance. You may be able to get in-state waivers. There's just different ways to build that scholarship in order for that student athlete to participate, unlike able-bodied where you just get the athletic scholarship. So those are just a few of the barriers. You may have structural barriers as well, dealing with facilities. And so if the facility is not accessible for an individual to be able to participate in a program, maybe the program, I think I gave you the example the other day, maybe it's one facility in your area that's completely accessible, but they don't have the space for you to create a program for an adaptive sports program. And so now everyone in that area can't participate in that particular sport. And so, like I said, structural barriers, not having elevators, appropriate locker rooms, those are different barriers that people can encounter when they're trying to get into adaptive sports. And then the other part is role models, you know, not having a role model that looks like you, not being confident enough, or not, I won't say not being confident enough, but just not being comfortable of going into an adaptive sport just because you have a disability. Maybe you don't want to be with other people who have disabilities because, you know, some people think because you have a disability, you need to be with other people who have disabilities. Mm-hmm. But it also allows individuals with disabilities to be able to have friends who are just like them. Mm-hmm. And to say, I am not the only person out here who uses a wheelchair. I'm not the only person out here who uses a walker. There's several of us, and we play sports.
Right.
You know, and that's an incredible feeling. You know, one of my colleagues and teammates, Darlene Hunter, does a wonderful job in Texas with recruiting and changing of laws, working with the intercollegiate programs, starting intercollegiate programs. She just does a wonderful job, and that's what we need other people to do, is create these programs and give people opportunities. We're missing a whole population of people who need opportunities to better themselves and have careers.
Right. And even with all of that, you didn't just like stop there trying to create those spaces. I read that how you're part of the MOVE United Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, which is the largest disability sport organization in the US. And you serve as a sports envoy for the US Department of State. So has being in those positions kind of help you start to create those opportunities for those disadvantages that the community is already facing on its own?
Absolutely. It was really an eye-opener, because when you go to other countries and you see the disparities in the other countries, more so than you see in the US, it really allows you to focus in and hone in on what's going on in your own home country. And so, you know, one of the things that there were two situations in Botswana that really impacted me, and I was able to impact them as well, is the fact that we had one girl who was roughly around 8 years old, and her mother would push her in her wheelchair everywhere she went, and we brought her, we had to get her from her mother because her mom was everywhere she was and she would not participate. So we eventually, Rose Hollerman was with me, and we eventually were able to get her on the court by herself with everybody else and practice. And then we were able to get her mom in a wheelchair and play with her. Oh, wow. And it just opened up their minds so much, and you could see the joy and the excitement. And after that practice, the mom was no longer pushing her in her wheelchair. She was pushing herself because she knew she could do it now. The other scenario was also in Botswana, where we helped teach a man how to transfer out of his everyday chair into his wheelchair, into his basketball wheelchair, because he'd only done it once and he didn't think that he was strong enough to do it. And so we taught him how to do it, and he did it, and his face just lit up. He was so happy and so amazed that he was able to do that. So a lot of times, we create the handicap for ourselves without even knowing, and without even, trying or trusting in ourselves that we are able to do these things. And I think a lot of that has to do with society. Society puts that bug in your mind that if you're disabled, you can't do, and that's starting to change now. So you're starting to see more commercials. You're starting to see more people in commercials with disabilities. You're starting to see more Paralympians, Special Olympians. You're starting to see all of those, in commercials that are starting to become mainstream, which is very important. The other part was, we always are fighting the gender disparities, especially within sport. And when I was in Papua New Guinea, it was very evident, and it was very evident in China, that there was a huge fight for gender equity. And so we pushed for that. And I'm not sure what happened after we left with China, but I do know that there was more of a willingness to create equality for boys and girls in that particular area, and to strengthen their minds and build their confidence when it came to being able to participate in sport and play on the same playing field even. So here in the US, it brought it all back home. So that way I could start to see and focus on, okay, this is what we need here. This is what we're lacking. How can we create these opportunities for these people and get them involved so that they can make a difference and then give back? I always think about Gabrielle Union. She did an interview and she said, when you're one of few African-American females in acting, you're competing against each other. And I would slander and compete and, whatever I had to do to be number one. And then I forgot who she said came to her and spoke to her and said, it's about sharing. When you make it, you have to share what you did in order to bring the next person along. And that's what I want to be able to do. I want to be able to bring that next person along so that they have the same opportunities and better opportunities.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear kind of just like your story and the moves that you've made despite everything you've been through. And one thing that we kind of talked about is just how like everyone who is disabled is not necessarily bound to whatever the equipment they may need or whatever the case may be. Like you yourself, you don't always use a wheelchair. So can you kind of talk about some of like the challenges or discrimination that you have dealt with being a disabled person or identifying yourself as such and others in the community?
I can give you a few examples. A lot of people see equipment that's meant for people with disabilities or disabled people, and they automatically assume you cannot. And I'm ambulatory, I walk. I use a wheelchair for sport. Before my hip replacements, I used a wheelchair here and there. Actually, after my hip replacements, I used a wheelchair on days that I was struggling with. But, people get in their mind that you're disabled, you can't do, and they don't even think about what they're saying and what they're seeing. So I'll give you an example that I had at the airport. I walked up, I had my basketball, excuse me real quick. I had my basketball wheelchair with me because I was traveling to play at a tournament. And I walked up to the counter with my wheelchair beside me. And, I was asking for a tag for my wheelchair. And then I was also asking for an exit row to sit in because I'm 6'3". And it's difficult for me to sit in small spaces for a long amount of time. So I have to be able to stretch my legs out. And so she looked at me and she said, well, are you able to walk? And I just thought to myself, I said, well, I just walked up to the counter.
Right.
And it's just little things like that. I was at a conference once, and I was sitting in a wheelchair, and I think I was pushing another wheelchair, and I wasn't sure where I was going because I was trying to find the exhibition hall. So I asked this lady, and I asked her, I said, can you tell me how to get to the exhibition hall? And there was another girl with me, and she turned to the other girl and gave her directions on how to get to the exhibit hall. And I said, but I'm the one who asked for the directions. And so there's just this assumption that, because you're in a wheelchair, you can't comprehend either, and so it's those little things that really aren't that little that make a difference. We have to change that perspective of the term disability. Disability does not mean that I can't do something. It doesn't mean that I'm wheelchair bound. It doesn't mean that I'm confined to a wheelchair. It doesn't mean that I'm weak and dependent upon everyone. It just means that the environment didn't do their job. Society didn't do their job. They didn't make it for everyone. They made it for one type of person. And I was not in that, thought process when they started making things. I ask people all the time, how many of you all use the wheelchair accessible stall in the bathroom? How many of you all park in the wheelchair accessible parking space? Well, a lot of it's convenience, for people who don't need that spot. But why not make the bathroom stalls large for everyone? You don't have to have so many, but why not make them large enough so that everybody can fit in them? It's not just for people who are wheelchair, maybe for people who are obese, who have balance problems, all kinds of things. And I think one of the largest barriers there is instructional barriers, the environment that we live in. It's not made for every person here on this planet.
Right. And we talked about it before. Like I was saying how I've seen a lot of stuff on just Instagram and Twitter, just about how like airlines are handling people's wheelchairs and how they get broken a lot of the time, or just any of their equipment. So it's definitely something that we as a society need to start thinking about at the forefront of our brains. And it's been so great just learning from you and listening to you. And for everyone in our audience, I really hope that you learned something today. So I am going to come up on my last question. So if anyone else has questions, please put them in the chat for the Q&A after with Garnett. So lastly, I just want to ask you, what is some advice that you would give people trying to understand adaptive sports, or who want to try and be a part of that community to help and kind of just like learn and make it easier for those conditions and just spaces?
Well, one, I would say, remember it's an opportunity for everyone involved. So it's not just an opportunity for the person going in, participating and being the athlete, but it's also an opportunity for a person to become a coach, become a volunteer, to become an administrator, to become in the marketing, business. There's so many realms that are affiliated with adaptive sports that the opportunities are just too great, not to be able to showcase those. And so when you're looking, if somebody were to approach you and say, hey, I would like to get involved in adaptive sports, know what's out there, make an effort, be intentional to know what's out there. As me, for myself, as a collegiate player who got injured and did not finish out the year, I can tell you right now that if somebody told me that you can keep your scholarship, you can make it to the Paralympics, which is equivalent to the Olympics, by playing wheelchair basketball, I probably would have done it at that particular time, because then it would be set up to say, okay, my goal is the Olympics, my goal is the Paralympics. Okay, that's equal. That's the same. All right. I still have my scholarship. You're still going to keep my scholarship or give me a scholarship. That's still the same. I can still play basketball. Let's do it. But you have to be intentional about it. You have to be able to push the envelope. You have to say, yes, we will find a way. You cannot say, well, I'm not sure we have the money, the funding, we're going to have to cut a program. Well, Title IX calls that already, and we're part of that. And so let's not eliminate a population because we don't know. No, find out when those people come, when those individuals or students come onto campus, know who they are, support them, ask questions. There's no question that is wrong that you're not going to get an answer to. Whether you're going to like the answer or not, you're going to receive an answer to further your educational knowledge of that particular topic. But you really have to help by pushing that envelope and creating those opportunities. If every program in the United States, every collegiate program in the United States had a sister or brother program for wheelchair basketball, track and field, swimming, we would all share that same opportunity. And there's always somebody on campus who has a disability. And you only need one to start the conversation and to get the program going. And then you seek for, you have grants that are out there, different type of funding situations that can help support those programs. But we have to start somewhere, and we have to start. And there's a need for it, and we just have to do it. I mean, I can't, talk more about that need. And currently we only have roughly 12 to 15 intercollegiate programs in the United States. And they're spread out all over the United States. So they're not very close to each other. That's not enough. I mean, we can have 12 programs. I mean, in North Carolina, and the area I'm in currently, we have 12 programs right here, and so that's just one state, and that's one city, maybe basically two cities, and we have 12 in the United States. So that's a big problem. And so we really need, administrators, presidents, university chancellors, athletic directors to truly get on board and help push these programs and start creating these programs to give these people, individuals with disabilities, opportunities to have an education, higher education, earn a career.
Right. And thank you so much for everything that you've been telling us. I've learned a lot, like I mentioned before, and I'm sure everyone else is as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Garnett so he can run the Q&A, because there's been quite a few questions in the chat. So
Dr. Woodson-Smith, again, thank you so much for spending this time with us. Probably what our audience doesn't know is that we always get a chance to spend time with our guests in a pre-meeting a day or two before. And I probably took more notes today than I did yesterday when we met. So you just have a wealth of knowledge, and your experiences are just phenomenal in this area. And so again, thank you for that. We do have some questions. You started touching on that in your last response to Taylor, but Matt is asking, what role do you think the NCAA should play in promoting access to adaptive sports? So if you can talk a little bit more specific about how the NCAA can do that.
Well, there's a committee being formed currently to start the discussion again in how to implement adaptive sports at a varsity sport level within the NCAA to become that true varsity NCAA sport. And so creating those conversations, but not only having the conversation, because a lot of times things begin with the conversation and they end with the conversation. But we don't want it to end with the conversation. We need to have plans in place. You can start small, start with a couple of universities, start with a division, a region, and run it through there to try it out. You know, the ECAC has a swimming program where their swimmers are NCAA swimmers, adapted swimmers, and so they earn points for their university. So individual sports, it's easier to do that. Team sports, it's more challenging, but it can be done and it should be done. It's just a matter of finding the people within the NCAA who are going to push that. You know, that we have the fight currently with the NCAA and gender, you know, problems that we have with the Final Four. And so, you know, that we fall on the tail end of that. And so we're fighting for gender equality. Well, now we're going to bring in disability. What are we doing for the disabled population to be able to become an NCAA athlete as well? And so having the right people on those committees and creating those opportunities, creating those conversations and implementing those plans, I think that's going to be one of the ways that it's going to start to be able to really push for that to occur. I believe I was speaking with Dr. Ted Fay, who was running one of these committees, and he was conversating with the president of, I think it was the president of the NCAA, and at the time, and I think they were moving forward in that realm. And then people transitioned, personnel changed, and then it fell. And so they're starting to bring that back, that conversation back. And then hopefully in the next few years, we'll start seeing more NCAA adapted sports.
Yes, we need to see that. So we need to figure out how to get you on those committees.
I'm working on it.
This question comes from our blog writer, Kennedy Collins, and she's asking, what kept you going during those times when you felt defeated?
I would probably say my parents and God. One, I knew that the thoughts that I was having were not God-oriented, were not Christian-oriented, and I had to change. I went through, I mean, I hit rock bottom. It took probably going rock bottom to be able to build myself up. And then also finding opportunities. You know, basketball, at that time, we talk about different types of identities, and you have athletic identities, and I was a true athletic identity. I was working on my PhD, and the only thing that I could think of was playing professional basketball. If I couldn't play professional basketball, what else am I going to do? But I'm working on my PhD. And so, you know, when you look at the identities of athletes, and especially athletes who have disabilities or transition into that, you have to build a bigger identity for yourself. And it really wasn't until now and until I really got into church that, you know, my athletic identity really didn't mean anything. It was my God identity that I had to really deal with. And that really opened up my eyes to be able to be okay with everything that I went through. And so just, you know, following God for me and what my family values were, that's really what pushed me through.
All right, thank you for sharing that. This question comes from our GA Larissa Campalo, and this is a fun question for you. If you could play anyone one-on-one, who would you pick?
Any man. I've had so many men come up to me and say, oh, I can post you up. I can post you up. And it never happens.
So you've already been there and done that.
Yes.
Okay. I like that answer. Great answer. More on a serious note, you really enlightened our team yesterday on a term called inspiration porn, something that we had never heard of. And I want you to kind of enlighten this group on what that term is. And also for a person who is inspired by a person that has a disability, but their inspiration is not because of their disability. It could be because of their leadership skills. It could be because of their journey that they're sharing. It could be for any other reason. How would that person communicate that to that individual without falling under that, that term of inspiration porn?
Right. Well, I think first you really have to look at disability. A lot of people will use disability as the excuse of why you can't do something if someone with a disability is able to do something. And so it's you don't want to use a person with a disability to inspire you or to be your inspiration just because of their disability. And so you might look at, I always give the example of when I'm in the gym and I'm playing wheelchair basketball or shooting wheelchair basketball, and somebody's on the other side of me who's an able body and they're shooting basketball, and they come over to me and say, "Oh, you're such an inspiration." Well, you're doing the exact same thing that I'm doing, but I'm just using a chair and you're using what, what's his name? Curry shoes, maybe. It's the exact same thing. So you don't want to use somebody's disability alone to say that that's the excuse or not the excuse to be able to do something else. So because this person is out here playing wheelchair basketball, or maybe because this person is out here lifting weights, oh, you're such an inspiration to me because you have a disability and you're able to do something, versus, you're lifting 150 pounds or 500 pounds like Zach Rule does, benches 500 pounds. That's impressive. Who can bench 500 pounds? You inspire me because you took the journey to get your body to where it is to be able to do that, not because you have a disability and you're not able to use a part of your body to be able to lift 500 pounds. What person can lift 500 pounds? That's my inspiration to be able to say, okay, if you can do it, I know I still can't do it, but I'm going to try to see how far I can go when I'm looking at training without the disability. And so I always relate it to race. If you look at race and disability, they're almost identical in the history of what they went through. And so you have to change that perspective of what we've been taught about people with disabilities, of what they cannot do, to what they're able to do, and what can we do for accommodations to be able to allow them to do, and then not be inspired because they have a disability, but of the achievements that they have made based on the work that they have put forth. Yes, everybody's going to have to overcome something. You're going to battle something. If you're living, you're going to have to battle something at some point in time, and you're going to struggle with something at some point in time. And so you don't want to put that alone with the disability to be able to say, oh, well, you overcame your disability. No, I didn't overcome my disability. My disability is still there. I embrace it. I'm empowered by it, but I'm not going to be an inspiration, your inspiration to do something.
Thank you for clearing that up, because I know a lot of times, a lot of well-intentioned people, they kind of fall into that, to that trap, and it's not their intentions, but
no,
it can be offensive to disabled community.
And it's the unknown. So if there's a lot of people in this world who have never seen someone who has a disability, in person. They probably don't know someone who has a disability. And if they do, it's probably going to be their grandparents, and so associating the grandparents with a younger person and comparing those two, it's not the same, and so you don't want to fall into the traps of, well, I didn't know. Yes, you have an opportunity to not know, but now that you do, let's educate a little bit further so that we don't repeat those same mistakes.
Thank you for that education. Really appreciate it. One last question from our audience. This comes from our GA, Olivia Wiggins. She says, what is something you wish you could tell your younger self about failure?
Don't be afraid of it. Failure is part of life. Don't be afraid to fail. I think my probably my entire life, I tried not to fail. And wouldn't do certain things because I thought I would fail. And so I would definitely tell myself, don't worry about failure. Failure is just a stepping stone to becoming better. And so I would tell everyone, don't be afraid to fail.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. There are a lot of comments in the chat. One from one of our directors, Dr. Lapchick. He said this is one of the very best in an already great series. So informative and inspirational. Thank you, Andrea, for your life's work. The world is a better place because of you.
Oh, thank
And
you.
then from Karen McCoy, she says, you continue to be an incredible role model and leader. Thank you, and go Dukes. So again, really appreciate having you today. I think this was a great episode to have, especially a unique one, as Garnett kind of said in our meeting yesterday. And it's been such a pleasure to have you, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I want to add one last thing, because since this just passed, that if you're interested in playing wheelchair basketball, whether you have a disability or not, please pursue a program, because you participating in the sport allows more people with disabilities to be able to have that opportunity to play. So if you try it, trust me, you're going to fall in love with it, and you're going to want to continue to play. And I know that I've had several students of my own who tried it and say, oh, I wish I could play. I wish we had a program. Well, now you can play wheelchair basketball at a recreational level. If you're female, let me take that. If you are a woman, you can play wheelchair basketball without a disability. And then also in the intercollegiate division. So if you're in college and you want to play, you contact the coach and see if they are looking for additional players, or if there is not a program, but somebody's thinking about a program, just look and ask, because we are trying to create more opportunities for people with disabilities. And one of the ways that we are trying to do that is by including people without disabilities, and hopefully even eventually increasing the types of disabilities who can participate in the sport as well. So create impact, recruit. If you know someone, pass them along to someone who's involved in adapted sports, get them involved, get yourself involved. We're always looking for more people to be participants within this program, within these programs.
You heard it here first, everybody. Make sure you keep an eye out for those programs and possible initiatives that you can stay a part of. So again, thank you so much. And we are going to close out for the day.
Thank you.
So tune in on July 15th at 2 p.m. for episode 12, where I will be speaking with Novine Monpoir. My apologies if I said that incorrectly. She's the director of marketing and event management in the Pac-12. And also please follow us on all social media platforms to stay up to date and informed on future programs at Institute SSJ. As you can see, we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn as well. Thank you for all of your support for Invisible Women in Sport. We are a nonprofit organization with our other programs that impact various social justice issues. Please use the QR code to support us with a financial gift as we continue to change lives through the power of sport. Again, thank you to our guest, Dr. Andrea Woodson-Smith, for being here with us today, our producer, Garnett L. Overby III, our senior advising consultant, Matt Edelson, our graduate assistants, Larissa Campello and Olivia Wiggins, and our blog writer, Kennedy Collins. And again, a special thank you to everyone that has been supporting us through the way with Invisible Women in Sport. Once again, please follow us on all social media platforms. If you are not able to catch an episode, we are also on Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts at Institute SSJ. So if you ever miss an episode, please just go there. And as I said before, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, we are there as well. And as always, viewers, we need your feedback to make Invisible Women in Sport the best it can be. Following today's episode, you will receive a short survey, so please complete and submit it to us. We are still getting a lot of inquiries about if we have any connections to internships. So if any of our supporters or members have internships available, please send your information to our producer, Garnett Overby at goverby@ucf.edu, so we can send it out to the people reaching out to us. And again, please tune in on July 15th at 2 p.m. for episode 12. I am your host for Invisible Women in Sport, Zoomcast, and see us now. Bye, everyone.